This spooky scary story time was submitted by someone named Michelle, and she detailed her experience meeting a fellow traveler while on vacation with her mother. It's creepy, it's spooky, but it's also interesting and a little bit curious as to what was really going on here. But she says that in 1997, she and her mother were taking a vacation to Puerto Vallarta, and Michelle was very excited because she had never been out of the US before, and their plans for the vacation were simple. They were just going to hang out by the pool at their hotel, they were going to go to the beach, and they were going to go whale watching. Elle says she has always been very outgoing, and in addition to speaking fluent English and Spanish, she can also hold conversations in 5 other languages. It's something she's very proud of, and she said within the first few days of her vacation, she had struck up conversations with travelers from France, Sweden, Germany, and Brussels. She had also struck up light friendships with locals from different parts of Mexico, and she said this was exactly the kind of lively international atmosphere that she had hoped for in traveling somewhere outside of the US. And very early on in her vacation, she also met an Australian traveler named Oliver. And he was about 18 years old. He was very short and petite. She said he was about 5 foot tall with bright red hair and freckles. He was very enthusiastic, and she said that he had the kind of excitement that someone on their first big adventure carries. And he was traveling alone, but he had an around the world ticket. But his first stop was Puerto Vallarta because he had an aunt who owned a restaurant there. It was Oliver's first time in Puerto Vallarta as well, but he had been there for a little bit longer than Michelle and her mom. So they strike up a conversation and they're talking about travel and cultures, and Oliver's telling her all about the places he's been, and she's telling him all of the places she hopes to go. Michelle said it was a very easy conversation. It was nothing romantic. It was just 2 travelers sharing stories. And after about an hour of talking, Oliver suggests them grabbing some coffee at a cafe he had found recently that's about 15 minutes from the hotel. So they take a cab there. They arrive at an open air cafe, and she said it was gorgeous. It was an outside patio setting, shaded by tall palms with warm ocean air coming in. Serving cafe con leche in colorful glass cups, and warm pastries had just come out of the oven. The place smelled delicious. She was in heaven. She said she felt safe and peaceful and relaxed. They sat there for quite some time, but as they were finishing their coffees, Michelle said she actually still had half a pastry on her plate when Oliver stops laughing and he looks at her and he says, "Do you see the man standing over there staring at us?" And she looks over and she sees this extremely tall man, about 6'6", who has this unnaturally dyed bleach blonde hair that's standing up in stiff spikes, wearing mirrored sunglasses that reflect themselves back to them. And she says he's standing about 10 feet away. But as she looks at him, he smiles. And she said his dentures were poorly fitted. His teeth were too large for his mouth. He seemed to take her glance in his direction as an invitation for him to join them. But she said what disturbed her the most about this man was the way that he moved. Instead of turning his head, for example, he would turn his entire upper body. His movements were stiff and robotic, and she says the only way she can think to describe his movements accurately is he was as if he was a machine that was learning the way that human bodies worked and trying to mimic it. And he's beelining straight for their table. And she said he was still smiling the same creepy, cold, and calculated smile. And she said as he approached them, her stomach dropped and she just felt this sensation of something being very wrong. Michelle and Oliver were sitting at a table directly across from each other, but it had 4 chairs. And without asking, the man sits in a chair between them. He ignores Michelle completely and he turns his attention on Oliver. And he says, "I know who you are." And Oliver looks confused and he says, "You're Jewish, you're from Australia, and you're traveling the world." Oliver's face changed to one of confusion, to one of horror. His face went pale, and each time the man spoke, he revealed something more and more personal about Oliver and his life. He said, "You went to this school growing up, and your father's name is this." And the things that he was revealing to Oliver that he knew became more and more personal. Michelle said things that no stranger should have known. Finds it hard to explain, but says that she felt the air around them grow heavy. It was as if time itself slowed down. And out of nowhere, she has this intrusive thought that says, he wants his head, he wants his brain. And she's thinking, where did that come from? And the thought repeats, he wants his head, he wants his brain. She says she has no idea where that voice in her head came from, but she truly believes that it was the Holy Spirit warning her. Her words. That her pulse raced faster, and she knew that she had to get these strangers' attention off of Oliver, so she pipes up. He tries to interrupt, and she says, "If you're so psychic, tell me something about me." But the stranger doesn't even glance in her direction. He continues talking to Oliver, and she said it was almost obsessive. It was compulsive, the way that he was revealing facts about Oliver's life, and they kept getting more and more personal. She said it was as if this man was hungry for something that Oliver had, and the conversation at this point had turned deeply disturbing, and said she didn't know what else to do, so in her head she started praying, and she said, "Give me peace from this man, make this man leave." And as she said it in her mind, a deep sense of calm and peace washed over her, but as it does, the man turns and sharply looks at her and says, "There you go, you feel better now, don't you?" Just as quickly as she felt calm, she now felt panicked again. She felt the blood drain from her face, and she said, "Who are you?" He said, "I just knew at this point that he was not normal," but he smiles again and he says, "I am the Messiah." Stomach twisted, she knew that they had to get out of there. So she raised her hand. The waiter came over. She asked for the check. She paid. And she basically drags Oliver out of there. And as they're outside, they're trying to get a cab. Oliver is hesitating, though. He's looking over his shoulder. He's looking back toward the man who is paying his own tab inside the restaurant. But she gets a cab. She said she basically had to practically pull Oliver into the cab. And as they're pulling away, the man comes barging out of the restaurant shouting, "I am the Messiah. I am the Messiah. Come back." In the cab, she looks at Oliver and she says, "Did you know him?" And Oliver just shakes his head and she goes, "What was that all about?" And Oliver just quietly says, "What if he really was the Messiah?" She said she stared at him in disbelief, not believing that he would fall for the ramblings of what she thought was a crazy man. And she said that as soon as they got back to the hotel, she warned him not to go near that man again. She said, "I can't explain it, but I had this feeling that he wanted your head." Oliver just stared at her in disbelief and he was like, "But he knew things about me that no one else could know." "I don't care what he said. I have a horrible feeling about him. And I know we just met, but you should not go by that man again." And Oliver just says, "Okay, I'll think about it." But the sun was going down and he said, "I have to get back to my aunt's house." They said their goodbyes and agreed to meet the next morning at sunrise at a beach near his aunt's restaurant. Morning came and she went out to the beach where they had agreed to meet, but he never showed up. And she said she didn't see him for the rest of their 2-week vacation and still wonders what happened to him. But about a week after this incident at the cafe, she and her mother were walking along the boardwalk with some locals they had met, and they were headed toward a bar called the Cactus. And all of a sudden she looks up and she sees a man sprinting directly toward her. As he got closer, she recognized him. It was the man from the cafe. So she screamed and started to run, and a man that they were with, which was a 6-foot-tall bodybuilder named Juan, stepped in front of her to block him. He stopped and locked eyes with Michelle, and he said, "You kept me from talking to him. You kept me from Oliver." That I was absolutely dumbfounded. I didn't know what to say. All of the people she was with started asking, who was this man? What did he want from her? How did they know each other? And as this man realizes that this crowd is asking questions, he turns and he runs off in the direction from which he came. About a block away, they saw a police officer who they flagged down, and they described the man in detail and reported what happened. And the officer said that he would keep an eye out, but nothing much came from it. A few days after that incident, she and her mother were headed to a bar that they had visited earlier in their trip. And as they're approaching the bar, she sees him again, and he's standing outside of the bar. He's pacing back and forth, and he's talking to himself. He froze. She was terrified that he would see them again, but they slipped into another bar quietly, and when they came back out, he was gone. On their final day in Puerto Vallarta, she saw him one last time. He was at a restaurant and he was sitting with a big group of people, smiling and talking and laughing as if he were completely normal. And she said that's what disturbed her the most, because she knew he was not normal, but he could apparently blend in and act normal if he wanted to. Michelle says to this day, she is still convinced of one thing. That man was not human. She doesn't know what he was, but she says even thinking about this causes her to have intense waves of anxiety, but she thought it would be therapeutic to write it out. Send it in. She says she has her own idea of what she thinks he was, but is more so curious as to what everybody else thinks he was. But she said she does believe that he intended to harm Oliver, and says she does think that he would have eaten his brains had she not ruined it for him. This is Spooky Scary Storytime, the series where we share listeners' allegedly true stories about the creepiest or most unsettling things that they've ever experienced. If you have a story, please send it in. We'd love to hear it.